Hi, I'm Arnie Skelton, and each week in this podcast series, I'm going to offer you my top 10 tips on particular topics or themes that might be of interest to you as a teacher or manager, or both. Hi, and welcome to this week's podcast, which this week is all about being assertive. So I'm just about to offer my top 10 tips on being assertive. So, tip number 1. Typically, there are 3 states that are talked about whenever we're talking about being assertive. So it's just worth thinking about these and deciding which state you're in and which state you would like to be in. And the 3 states are assertive, aggressive, and non-assertive. And the important point at this stage is that whichever of those states you're in should be a choice, not an automatic or reflexive reaction or response. So tip number 1, choose your state. Tip number 2. So what is assertiveness? For me, it's about being honest and truthful about how you're feeling and what you would like someone else to change so that you don't feel that way. It's saying that in a calm and measured way. For example, you need to be under real self-control to be able to act assertively. The other consideration is that when you choose to be assertive, it's because you're asking probably for the situation or somebody else's behaviour to change. Of course, it's possible that you can develop such self-control that you're not affected by anybody else's behaviour or reaction, and therefore you can, if you like, not need to be assertive, because you don't need somebody to behave differently in order to be how you want to be. But if you, for an example, are a manager and you know that somebody else's behaviour, perhaps in your team, affects other people who don't have that degree of self-control, then you may need to be assertive in order that you can control your behaviour whilst addressing a behaviour that they have that affects other people. So it's not just about asking for a change in behaviour because it affects you. As a manager, you may want to ask somebody else to change their behaviour because it affects others in your team who you are responsible for. So tip number 2, assertiveness is about being honest and truthful and asking for other people to change so that you can change how you feel. Tip number 3, assertiveness is not natural in evolutionary terms. Typically, when under stress, we are bred or evolved to fight or flight. That is, to take the aggressor on by fighting or by running away. So, for example, way back when, we might be just walking through our patch and come across a saber-toothed tiger. The 2 responses you would have is to run and outrun that tiger or fight it and hopefully kill it. Now, in terms of evolution, those who will pass on genes successfully will be those who have developed great aggressive skills to fight off and defeat the tiger, or really good escape skills like running fast and climbing trees. And these are the genes that will get transmitted in evolutionary terms, so that by now, 2020, many of us are genetically programmed for fight or flight. We're not genetically programmed to say to the saber-toothed tiger, now look here, I know you've got needs, but so have I. It's just not going to happen. So whereas aggression and non-assertion are natural, evolutionarily natural, assertiveness isn't. It's a fairly new way of dealing with stress or threat. And the key point here is, therefore, if you wish to be assertive, you're going to have to learn it and suppress your biological evolutionary imperative to fight or run. So it's not natural, it has to be learned. And, same point, it's quite easy to learn assertive skills and practice them in safe, non-threatening environments, like an assertiveness course. The trouble is, whilst you develop those skills and practice them in a non-threatening environment, it's pretend, you don't actually have those same abilities when you're actually confronted by what threatens you or intimidates you. So you need to practice your assertiveness skills and embed them so that by the time in reality you have to face that modern day saber-toothed tiger. You are programmed to respond assertively to override your fight or flight response. So tip number 3, learn assertiveness. Don't expect it to be natural, and embed the core skills so that when you're faced with those threats, you can respond as close to automatically as you can. Tip number 4. Being assertive is not a personality change or a mission for life. It's a decision and skill set you can call upon when you need to. You don't have to be Mr. or Miss Assertive for the rest of your life, and that every situation and every circumstance you face will call on your assertiveness. No, you just be assertive when you need to be assertive. It's not a personality issue, it's a decision or choice issue. Tip number 5. There is a difference between being non-assertive and letting go. There are times when I've not been happy with someone's behaviour, but it just hasn't been important enough to me to address it and be assertive. I've just let it go. And I know that was my choice and I was comfortable with it. Being non-assertive is different. It's feeling really bad about someone's behaviour or expectations or the situation and not doing anything about it, and then feeling bad about yourself for not doing anything about it. So, tip number 6. This is now the first of my top 4 strategies for being assertive. Tip number 1, or tip number 6, is the ASS technique, the ASS technique. And this stands for acknowledge, say no, suggest the next best alternative. And what's powerful about this is it's 2 positives with the negative of no sandwiched between them. So acknowledging the request makes the person who's making that request feel valued, not diminished. Saying no is what you want to do, and you can provide the reason if you wish. And then straight away suggest the next best thing you can do given that you've said no to the specific request. So if I'm running a training course and somebody says, is there a chance of staying behind for a while and talking through some of those things, I might use the ASS technique if that's appropriate. I might say, well, I'd be delighted to do that. That's the acknowledgement. Say no, I'm not able to do that tonight, and give a reason. I've already promised to be back home to go to the park with the kids. And then your next best alternatives you suggest. For example, but if you email me with your thoughts or questions, I promise to get back to you and we can just have an email exchange. That's my next best alternative. So acknowledge, say no, suggest the next best alternative. That works really well for me. Tip number 7, which is my second assertive tip, is to use these response in this to use a 3-step response whenever you want somebody to be different, to behave differently with you. And the 3 steps are when you, I feel, so I'd prefer. So when you continue to look at the computer screen whilst we're having a conversation, I feel disconnected, I feel that what I'm saying isn't really being attended to, I feel a bit embarrassed, I feel a little bit unsure of your reactions, any of those. So I prefer if you could just stop looking at the screen and look at me while we're having a conversation. So when you do that, I feel this, so I'd prefer if you could change. When you, I feel, so I prefer. That's tip number 7. Tip number 8 is known as the broken record, and you have to be careful with this because it can backfire badly if it's misused. It's really used effectively when somebody is being very oppressive. They will not take no for an answer. And if you're not careful, you either cave in or get into an argument that escalates. So the broken record technique simply means work out what it is that you want to say, what it is that the position you wish to hold, and always come back to that. You can acknowledge whatever the other person is saying, but you will always come back to the position you want to hold. Little story. a young apprentice was working in a garage, and the manager, the owner of the garage, had to go out for the afternoon and said, Mr. Smith is going to come to pick up his car, expensive car, Bentley, whatever. It's being serviced, but he isn't good at paying. So you have to have the money from him. He's got the money with him. He has to have the money, or he can process by card, but don't let him take the car away without paying. And the apprentice thought, okay, fine. Hadn't realised what Mr. Smith would be like. Mr. Smith came in and said, can I have my car keys? Has the car been serviced? Yes. Can I have my car keys? You can have the car keys as long as you have paid. What do you mean, as long as I've paid? Well, I've been told that the car's ready, and when you've paid, I can hand over the keys. And that was the line the apprentice took. Whatever Mr. Smith said, the apprentice came back to, and as soon as you've paid, I can hand over the keys. So Mr. Smith would say things like, well, who do you think you are? Well, my name is, and as soon as you've paid, I'll give you the keys. Well, do you not know who I am? Yes, you're Mr. Smith, and obviously as soon as you've paid, I can hand over the keys. Well, I think this is really rude and offensive behaviour from such a young upstart like you. I want to see the manager. The manager will be back tomorrow morning, and happily you can come in and speak to him then. If you wish to take a car away, then if you pay, I'll give you the keys. And in the end, the person, Mr. Smith in this case, just recognises that their intimidation, their oppressive behaviour, their various putting down tactics are just not going to work. So it's a very effective block against being intimidated or being oppressed. Of course, if the person is making a reasonable request in any third party's view, and you use this technique, it's just going to really irritate them and be counterproductive. So it should only be used sensitively when you're feeling oppressed and the other person is not going to take no for an answer. Just hold the line. And it's called the broken record technique because it's the record that's stuck. It's got a little groove that won't move the needle on, and the record keeps getting stuck. So you are sticking to the position you've decided you want to move to and not beyond. So tip number 9, passive acceptance. Again, something you have to be careful with. It needs to be used appropriately in the right circumstance. And that's when somebody is making what we probably these days would call a snide comment, a bit of a put down, a bit of a dig. And they're looking to get a kind of a reaction, a response of either passivity or aggression. It's a provocative approach. So, what's that you've got round your neck? Do you call that a positive or an attractive tie? Yeah, I think it's quite nice, thanks. Honestly, look at you, timekeeping. You're 5 minutes late again. Yep, I am. Sorry about that. I don't know why you chose a green-coloured car. They're not safe, green-coloured cars. Oh, is that right? I didn't realise that. Thanks for that. You're just not rising to the bait. You're not, if you like, playing their tune. You're not doing what they are trying to do, which is provoke you into an inappropriate response. So just acknowledge their comment, let it go, and give them nothing back that they're looking for. So passive acceptance. Just accept what they're saying passively, but knowing that you're not wound up by it. It's different from non assertive, because you'd get wound up by it. Just don't let other people's behaviour affect yours. One of the phrases I quite like for that is, don't be infected by somebody else's poison. If they wish to behave like that, that's up to them. Don't be infected by it. And the final tip number 10, is I think quite important. If you're the kind of person who finds it difficult to say no, think about this. If you say yes to almost anything, the other person doesn't really know whether that yes is an honest yes because you want to say yes or because you can't say no. If you eventually say to somebody, no, I don't want to do that, then it thereafter validates all your yeses, because the person knows you can say no if you want to. So they feel more comfortable when you say yes. So the tip number 10 is saying no makes saying yes more honest. And that's it. those are my top 10 tips. So let me recap them again. Tip number 1, choose your state. Aggressive, assertive, or non-assertive. Tip number 2, assertive is about being honest and truthful about how you feel and why you would like somebody else to change so that you don't feel that way. Tip number 3, assertive is not natural in evolutionary terms, and so it has to be learnt and embedded to be useful. Tip number 4, it's not a personality change, it's just an appropriate set of behaviours and skills when the situation requires it. Tip number 5, there's a difference between being non-assertive and letting go. Tip number 6, use the ASS technique. Tip number 7, when I feel so I'd prefer technique. Tip number 8, use the broken record, but be careful. Tip number 9, use passive acceptance, but again, be careful. And tip number 10, saying no makes saying yes honest. So that's it. My top 10 tips on being assertive. Thanks for listening. Bye for now. Hi. If you find these podcasts interesting and useful, you can also find them on my website, which is www.effectiveconnect, all one word, .co.uk. So www.effectiveconnect.co.uk. And as well as these podcasts, you'll also find a lot of other useful learning and development material. So couldn't recommend it more. Go and have a look, see if there's anything there you'd like. www.effectiveconnect.co.uk. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe. You will still get the podcast for free, but you will also get an alert to let you know when the next podcast is available. And please recommend the podcast to anyone else you think might like it and benefit from it. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a review and any other comment, because they'll help promote the podcast series on the relevant platform. So, bye for now.